Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday, and it is August 22nd, '08, an ongoing program of the Irv Homer Show, rebroadcasting from irvhomer.com. We thank you for the response that we're getting from this attempt of ours to get some information out, basically the truth. And our response, our email is growing by leaps and bounds, and it's just another week before Labor Day, and that means that we will probably be changing our time schedule when business get back to usual in the United States after vacation time. So just bear with us, and we will be growing rapidly as a result of the results that we received so far from this program. It's amazing. I was out visiting some folks today at one of our local hospitals. A friend of mine is in the hospital, and it was amazing. The nurses and the folks visiting the hospital that recognized me and thanked me for information. It made me very humble. I'm not used to getting that type of accolade, even though I've been in the public eye for some 50 years. But it is rewarding to know that when you're not on a commercial radio station, that the public still recognize you, both young and old. Of course, let me remind you that because of the information that has come out this weekend, that probably Barack Obama will be announcing his vice presidential candidacy. I will be appearing on Channel 6 this Sunday at 11:30 on Inside Story. The program will be live, and it should be very interesting because many folks, when they do live television, get very nervous. So this Sunday, not a scheduled appearance of mine. I was scheduled to appear next week, probably will be appearing 2 weeks in a row, but I will be on the panel this Sunday from 11:30 to 12 on Inside Story following George Stephanopoulos. And I suppose the discussion will basically be the choice that Barack Obama has picked and the National Democratic Committee as to who will be the vice presidential candidate. What is important about it, both on the McCain side and on the Obama side, is that since their race is that close, and of course the pundits are saying that Obama is dropping in the polls and John McCain is coming up in the polls, and then they take another poll and then it's even, and there's a margin of error of 3%. It is a close race between the two right now, and so I suppose they're looking to see which vice presidential candidate can bring most to the party to get the presidential election in November. I maintain that in following the campaigns of both of the candidates, the Obama campaign is dealing with something that I'm firmly committed to, and that is that depending on the number of people that either party gets out on the street to get them into the polls will dictate who the presidential candidate is going to be. It's got nothing to do with vice presidential candidate or how much money they're spending on television advertising. To a certain degree it may, but if the people do not show up at the polls and they do not vote, then it's very possible that there's no way of telling which candidate is going to win or which political party will win. The other thing that I got involved in a discussion last night at dinner with some friends, and I want you to consider this seriously, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the effect of the time zones of our country. We have 4 time zones. We have Eastern Time, we have Central Time, we have Mountain Time, and we have Pacific Time. And I do believe that the exit polls and the projections that are made from East Coast polls closing at 8 o'clock, and then the polls in the Central Time close an hour later, the polls in the Mountain Time close an hour later, and then the polls on the Pacific Time, I think that influences greatly today the outcome of an election in which the East Coast really, in my opinion, dominates who the candidate's going to be. And of course, one of the gentlemen at dinner last night said, well, Irv, what's the answer? I said, the answer is going to be a tough thing to implement. And that implementation is that no poll results and no exit polls be conducted and no projections made until the polls in California on Pacific Time close. And at that point, all of the pundits on the 4 time zones can get on television, make their projections on anticipated poll results from the East Coast, Central, and the Mountain Time. But we don't very seldom hear that time zone difference mentioned in the outcome of our political system when it comes to national politics. And I think it's very important that because of the means of communication today, with instant results and projections and exit polls, that has become, I think, a real factor in determining who the presidential candidate is going to be on the national election. And I just hope that people take that into consideration. I have to answer one email in particular, and that is an email from a gentleman who feels that I didn't answer the question regarding my concern about the fact that 9/11, when the anniversary is coming up shortly, these are all my emails that I've received, folks, about the conspiracy of 9/11. And the gentleman says that you've dug your heels in without answering my original question from the email last week. I asked you how those buildings were able to fall at near free fall speed, and tell me the mechanism other than a controlled demolition is capable of doing this. I don't believe that Osama bin Laden was the mastermind of anything. My government, your government did this. Airplanes, fuel, what brought down Building 7? I guess you've dug in, but I appreciate your addressing it. Well, let me make it perfectly clear to the sender of the email. 15 of the 19 people that hijacked the aircraft, the 4 aircraft, were Saudi Arabians. They were not Iraqis. The logistics to set up a situation to commit that kind of attack, having been instrumental in my military career, not as a professional strategist, but someone who was familiar with setting bombing missions over Europe and knowing the time that it takes, the strategy necessary, fuel consumption, weather conditions, weight of the aircraft, possibility of a leak, the secrecy involved, cannot be done, in my opinion, by Osama bin Laden. It had to be done by a military expert, a group of military experts, sponsored by a particular government. That government, I believe, was Saudi Arabia. I don't believe that America was complicit in it, although I wouldn't doubt anything when it comes to money and power. But I don't think that the United States, or anyone in the United States, unless they were spies, unless they were paid handsome sums of money by Saudi Arabia to be part and parcel of this gigantic undertaking. Now, what I'm going to say may offend some of you folks, but that is the type of program I do. It took genius, A, to learn to fly those aircraft, B, to be able to course the navigational flight of those aircraft, B, to determine the weight load of those aircraft, C, to know that there weren't any fighter planes that America could scramble to shoot them down before they reached their target. And so it took a lot of strategic planning for a mission of that magnitude. And that was not done by some bearded guy in a cave in Afghanistan. That was done by military experts who knew how to fly aircraft, who knew the configuration of those aircraft, who knew the location of where our fighter planes were, who probably knew the Strategic Air Command and to what areas they patrol, probably were aware of the other commercial traffic that was in the air at the time, so there wouldn't be collisions at the altitudes that those planes were required to fly, So there was a whole planning session, ladies and gentlemen, to make that come off as successful as it was. Now, by definition, the two World Trade Centers were hit. By definition, the Pentagon was hit. The longevity of the plane that landed in Shanksville that was targeted for the White House, allegedly, I'm going by the information that is available to all of us, that was a mastermind of strategic planning. And why do I say that? Because the biggest amount of terrorism that is being caused in Afghanistan and Iraq is the IEDs, the bombs that are placed along the road that are triggered by cell phones. There's no masterful bombing. There's no masterful attacks on our tanks, no masterful attacks on our Humvees. These are roadside terrorists. These are homegrown cells of terrorism within the countries that we're occupying and creating a regime change. So if there was going to be a non-governmental sponsored attack on America, they would have attacked as cell attacks. Probably our government is watching various cells. We don't know the full magnitude of how much intelligence we have in America. But they would blow up the Navy Yard. They would blow up a bridge, Delaware River Bridge, the Ben Franklin Bridge. Blow up the Golden Gate Bridge. They would do something internal that would not require a Herculean plan of attack. It would be third column terrorism. But this was a mastermind of commercial aircraft, not committed by some cell somewhere in Bora Bora or in the caves of Afghanistan. And that is why I believe that it was state-sponsored by Saudi Arabia, financed by Saudi Arabia, financed by Islamic charities, masking as Islamic charities to fund money into the application of this attack. When it comes to the destruction of why the World Trade Center collapsed the way it did, I can only say I doubt very much whether there were demolition charges placed in the World Trade Center or Building 7, which is the miracle building that did not get hit by a plane, did not get hit by anything, but it collapsed the same way that the World Trade Center did. But let's assume, ladies and gentlemen, and this is something I discussed with builders of high-rises and builders of skyscrapers. Let's assume that we have in America a thing called planned obsolescence. We build our cars to last 100,000 miles, and then they take the warranty off, plan to have a refrigerator go bad after 20 years. There's a book written many years ago by a gentleman by the name of Vance Packard. And Vance says, for capitalism to survive and manufacturing to survive, we must have planned obsolescence. We cannot plan to build anything that's going to last forever. Now, what happens when they want to destroy buildings after they've served their purpose? We've seen it happen in Las Vegas. We've seen it at the Sears building here in America and the United States and Philadelphia. We've seen the Raymond Rosen housing project in Philadelphia, which was a low-cost housing development, high-rises. We saw the way they were demolished and the way they come down in a concentrated form as the World Trade Center came down. So it is possible, and I only say is possible, that when those buildings were constructed, that demolition charges were already placed in those buildings. So at the point of their obsolescence, they could be destroyed, and they would collapse the way they did. Symptomatic of the way they destroy casinos in Las Vegas, or the Sears building in Philadelphia on Roosevelt Boulevard. I have yet to have it confirmed from all of the inquiries that I've made that in the planned obsolescence of buildings, that they put these dormant demolition charges strategically placed throughout the building so that at the time the building no longer serves its purpose or it costs too much money to regroup them, to fit them for air conditioning or for elevator service or upgrading them, that they put these demolitions in there. I have no way of knowing it, but it is a possibility. But I don't think that there was a conspiracy by our government or even the Saudi government. Although it wouldn't surprise me that the third column of terrorists could have strategically placed those demolition charges, since in 1993, when the attempt was first made on the World Trade Center, when they blew up the garage, that they had been working diligently, masquerading as custodians in the building, masquerading as employees of the building, masquerading as construction companies, getting contracts from the World Trade Center owners to maintain the building, that through some type of construction, invasion, spies, third column activities, that ammunition was placed, those demolition charges were placed in the buildings. And that at the strategic time when the planes hit the World Trade Center, that triggered the demolition charges, and so the buildings came down in the way they did. So all of these things, if you extrapolate, you can come up with a conclusion that yes, those buildings had demolitions in them. Who placed them there, I don't know. Was it the Saudi government that spent billions of dollars? Was it the Islamic terrorists that put money in these organizations that the law firm of Coase & O'Connor found? Financiers, banks, charities, foundations that paid these men to work behind the scenes? We're very lax when it comes to doing security checks for folks in commercial buildings. But when these people are dedicated as they are, it's very possible, once again, that those buildings had already had detonating charges placed in them in strategic areas so that those buildings would come down the way they did. Do I think the United States government was complicit in it? I know that there are some scoundrels in government, in our government as there are in other governments. I don't think there was some renegade, disgruntled State Department employee, someone who had decided to take his allegiance from America and place it into the Islamic world, that helped. Money is a great factor when it comes to getting information or hiring people. Guy making $100,000 a year can be bought, I'm sure, for $500,000. And so with the tremendous amount of money that Saudi Arabia had, and the other Arab nations have, it's very possible that they bought all of the engineering skills that they needed from Americans, and were smart enough to know that these people would never rat on them or divulge where they got the money from. So that, I hope, to the person who sent me the email and to you folks out there, may explain my feeling. I remember at the time the Oklahoma City bombing took place at the Murrah building. And it was symbolic, ladies and gentlemen, in the Oklahoma City bombing of the federal building, the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, in which Timothy McVeigh was finally executed for, that before there was an investigation into the way the building was destroyed from the so-called car bomb that was placed strategically outside the Murrah building, they saw fit to destroy the building. So that an in-depth analysis, because of the death of so many people in that building, and the religious leaders that fought against the invasion that went into the bodies that were there, the parts of the bodies that were there, the moral outrage of society, that they did not want to spend the time to investigate thoroughly how that building blew up, which many, including one general that I interviewed who was in charge of American demolition for about 10 years in military detonation, an expert in it, he said it never happened the way they claim it happened. There was more to it than that. And so these conspiracies of silence, I don't call them conspiracies of terrorism, I call them conspiracies of silence. The last thing any government wants to be known is that their intelligence failed. And so we cover up things. We cover up the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Garfield rather. We couldn't cover up the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. It was obvious that Brinkley did it. But the possibility of these extrapolations that make sense is not a conspiracy, because the information is all there. All it takes is a total, complete, objective examination. And as I said, you'll never find out. The law firm of Cozen O'Connor in Philadelphia, who sued and just lost in lower court, they'll probably appeal it to the higher court, felt that Saudi Arabia and the charities, the Islamic charities, were instrumental in financing the destruction of the World Trade Centers. But along comes the State Department and says, unless the State Department and the administration claims that these states are terrorist states, they cannot be sued. Now, what's going to be interesting, ladies and gentlemen, and as I said, I haven't spoken to anyone from the law firm in Philadelphia, Cozen and O'Connor, whether or not in the change of administration in November and the inauguration in the year 2009, whether the next president, whether it be John McCain or Barack Obama, will say to the State Department, that no longer applies. Friends or enemies alike, if you suspect, with almost conclusive evidence, that they were instrumental in causing any harm to the United States or the ownership of American buildings, American territory, you have a right to sue them. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to watch it very carefully, and we'll be reporting to you in the future as to what the next administration's position is going to be. And in destroying the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, it's symbolic of the destruction of the Move House in Philadelphia, when Mayor Rizzo insisted that that house be bulldozed down after Officer James Ramp was killed. Now that was capital evidence, ladies and gentlemen, of a capital crime in which firemen, police officers, and one Philadelphia police officer was killed. What was the rush to bulldoze down, build that building down, where there could be forensic scientists going in there, construction engineers, make a determination with all those bullets that were flying around. But Mayor Rizzo insisted that that building be bulldozed down, and he got away with it, and it was bulldozed down. The same as the Murrah building, which was torn down before there was a complete and total examination that satisfied building engineers all over the country and building engineers here in Philadelphia.
I have a question.
Yes.
With all that firepower and bullets flying through the air, how come only one person was shot and killed?
You mean Officer Jim Ramp?
Yeah, how in the world could that only be one person wind up shot?
That's an interesting question, Ron, and the point is, Who killed him? Where did the bullet come from? By testimony, the bullet had to come out of the basement in which 30,000 gallons of water was being poured in by the fire department. The bullet had to come up, make a 90-degree turn, go up again, and then go down the street and kill Officer Ram. The commander at the time was Commander Solomon. He was the chief of police, who was not a field commander. He was an administrative commander, made chief of police, in charge of that operation. So there were many questions that had to be asked then, and that was one of the questions. Now, there were other firemen that were injured by the fire, and some police officers were wounded. Jim Ramp was the only officer that was killed. So there were other injuries that took place.
Okay.
Now, we have a chat room, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, you can call in and get on the chat room, and I'll be glad to answer those questions for you. So I hope that answers the question of the World Trade Center and the conspiracy, or the cone of silence, the conspiracy of silence, as far as that destruction. There are many questions on the destruction of the killing of John F. Kennedy. One of these days I will play a tape, excuse me, that I have of my interview with Lee Harvey Oswald 2 weeks before he allegedly killed John F. Kennedy. And one of the questions I had asked him, because if you remember, Lee Harvey Oswald was with the Free Cuba Committee and had been to Cuba. And I turned the tape over to a voice print expert. Voice print is like doing polygraph tests. And I asked him specifically in the question, what do you have against John F. Kennedy, if anything, was the president? His response was that I have none. And so I gave him the voice print, and he more or less concluded about 90% that in the interview that I had with Lee Harvey Oswald, he was in Texas at the time, I was in Philadelphia, there was no indication there that there was any hatred for John F. Kennedy by Lee Harvey Oswald. Our inspector, who was on the Warren Commission, who is now the United States Senator, we wish him well, was never to use the position that he had on the Warren Commission for any political purpose whatsoever, or discuss it. However, Mr. Spector saw fit to go to England and extol the virtues of his one bullet theory. There are many questions, and because events happen so fast that we tend to push aside a lot of information that should come out when some of these tragedies occur. And people call them conspiracies. The question is, they're not conspiracies. And why do I say, going back, and I may be rambling a little bit because of the seriousness of what I'm saying today, we must go back to the embassy that was being built by the United States in Moscow, and I'm very weak on the date in which it was this building that cost American taxpayers about $300 million during the Cold War. They discovered by accident that there were some 300 strategically placed bugs put in the embassy of the United States by Russian workers, contractors, subcontractors, all who had been screened by not only the Russian government but our government. And when the building was about 9/10 finished, they discovered the bugs there, the way it was electrically wired. They had to tear the building down and start from ground zero. Check it out, folks. And that's why I said it's very possible that saboteurs, as I'm used to calling people who are coming into our country, creating all kind of terroristic havoc. Very possible that we had saboteurs place those strategically located demolition charges in the World Trade Center. And also in Building 7, which would explain why Building 7 came down if those charges were electronically set off. All the charges that have been placed would naturally go off. So the building could be there when the big building went down, when the planes hit the two World Trade Centers, the North and the South Tower. It also triggered the mechanism in the demolitions that were in Building 7 and brought them down. So I hope I answered that question for our great caller.
We have a question from the chat room.
We have a question in the chat room.
Irv, any investigation will result in two experts claiming the other one is wrong. How do we ever get the truth?
That's the story of, the only thing that two people agree upon is that the third one's crazy. The extrapolation of an argument, if it's conducted by both people who are introducing facts rather than opinion or speculation, can be determined the longer the conversation goes on. And the truth will stand up against speculation or stand up against opinion. All the facts are usually there. It requires a tremendous amount of research and investigation. And at that point, you can determine which one is telling the truth and what one is opinion. You have to be very careful how you listen to things to our listeners and our viewers. For example, Larry Kane, who I know socially once in a while, I ran into him. He does a program now called Point of View. I happened to tune it in, I believe it was last Sunday, I don't know when he's on, but I happened to be channels flipping, and there was my dear friend who's never read the United Nations Charter, Michael Smerconish, and the widow of Danny Faulkner, the officer that was killed by Mumia Abu-Jamal 26 years ago. My sympathies are, of course, with Maureen Faulkner, although she doesn't believe it, but no one should lose a husband or a loved one by murder. Whether Mumia did it or not is immaterial. The fact of the matter is that 26 years ago, Daniel Faulkner, Philadelphia police officer, died. And as I said, it's very important to watch and listen. Larry Kane referred to Mumia Abu-Jamal as a street thug. And many of you folks would agree that Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was found guilty of killing Danny Faulkner, was a street thug. And underneath had a scroll that Michael Smerconish, nationally recognized talk show host, implying that Michael has a national syndicated program, which he doesn't. So the two flaws in that program were very interesting to me. Now, there's no question that Michael Smerconish does a lot of national syndicated programming, sitting in for Bill O'Reilly, sitting in for Chris Matthews. However, he is not nationally syndicated at the present time. So it was misleading to say that he was nationally syndicated, and it was misleading that Mumia Abu-Jamal was a street thug. Mumia Abu-Jamal was president at one time of the Black Journalists Association. Many black journalists in the Philadelphia area of renown, respected by the journalist community, the Fellowship of Journalists, both black and white, would not appoint a person who was a street thug to be the president of the Black Journalists. Would not take a man who was an articulate debater, investigative reporter, and author of 3 books as a street thug. Yet Larry King felt it was his journalistic honesty to refer to Mumia as a street thug. Well, I can understand a street thug killing a police officer. That I can understand. But I can't understand the former president of the Black Journalists Association in Philadelphia, or someone with the skill of writing that Mumia Abu-Jamal has, or the articulation of lectures that he's been given, that he gave before this tragedy of Officer Faulkner being killed. And so it's important, ladies and gentlemen, when you're trying to determine the truth, to question when you hear things like I heard on Larry King's program Point of View. And I hope you get my point. What would cause a person of the brilliance of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who I knew personally because he did my news on WWDB radio, and I had many discussions with Mumia. We worked at night. I was never called as a witness. I was never called to testify. I was never called by the prosecution as to whether or not there was anything that we had ever discussed in the year or so that he was doing news for me at WWDB at night. Why? Why wasn't I called when it was known that Ramona Africa called for Harvey Clark, me, and another gal reporter, female reporter, to negotiate the surrender of the MOVE people when she was in the alley on Osage Avenue and then was forced back into the house with Michael, the 8-year-old who was burned. We never found out about it until a police officer, lieutenant, testified at the trial after Wilson Good, the mayor of Philadelphia, said all negotiations had broken down. Mayor Good, you lied. You didn't want it to be negotiated because the police officer played the tape of Ramona in the Africa during the fire asking for the 3 of us to negotiate a settlement of the MOVE confrontation. So when you take a look at all the facts, to our viewer, you have to analyze them yourself. Now you're still going to be, there are folks that are going to look at this archive and say, well, he's still a street bum, he's still a street thug. And I said, fine, if you want to call him a street thug. But the question is, a street thug will kill anybody. You, me, anybody else. Why did someone with the brilliance of a Mumia, what happened to him? Did he snap? What caused him? And how many other Mumias are out there running around loose that have the brilliance and the articulation and the genius of writing a book? What was that, a motorcycle going by?
Yes.
Well, it wasn't the police. And see, the room here is not soundproof, ladies and gentlemen. So we've got to find out, and I want to find out why Mumia did it. I've been in touch with Mumia in the past, 26 years. I have letters from Mumia in my possession. I have letters written to me by people, MOVE, who were incarcerated for 30 to 100 years. I will not get on this microphone or on commercial radio, and the MOVE people know it, until Mumia himself tells me that he did not kill Danny Faulkner. Now, you know I stuck my neck out for over 14 months to remove from death row Neil Ferber, and was successful. Because Neil told me point blank that he didn't kill Steve Boris. But Mumia never told me that he never killed Danny Faulkner, and until such time as he does, I will not advocate that he's innocent or not guilty. Should he get another trial? I think it would be too late and a waste of time. There are too many witnesses dead, too many facts, and too much prejudice already built up, both for and against Mumia. In my opinion, Mumia will die in jail. He won't be executed, but he will die in jail. So to determine which one of the two, quote, experts are accurate, you've got to do your own soul searching and look for that one word, that one sentence, that one phrase that just may trigger your thought process. Say, that's the truth. We have any other questions on the chat room?
Pardon me?
Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. We do have a chat room, ladies and gentlemen. You can get in there. I want to move into an area, ladies and gentlemen.
But there is a new article about Larry Menti.
There is a new article on it?
Yeah, part of his statement today was where that
Larry Menti, of course, you know, ladies and gentlemen, used to be with Channel 3, and him and Alicia Lane had a little breakup. Alicia Lane allegedly found not guilty of assaulting a police officer in New York. Larry Menti apparently, and I have no way of proving it, was jealous of the salary that she was receiving at Channel 3 more than his. And so he, did he plead guilty to that, Ron?
he pleaded guilty to hacking into another person's computer and email.
He pled guilty to hacking into Elisa Lane's email and computer.
But actually what he had said is that he had a flirtatious and improper, unprofessional relationship with Alicia Lane.
That's a new revelation.
Long dinners.
Yes.
Long dinners and late nights, and he, in the quote that it's in the on the Philadelphia Inquirer's website, saying that he allowed her to put her makeup on in his office, and his wife did find out about it from emails that he left on his desk, and he admitted it to her back in 2005.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, you will have to assume the extrapolation of a flirtatious relationship.
An improper
flirtatious relationship. Well, the plot thickens. But that is the latest, and thank you, Ron, for the update on Larry Menti, which is a little local sauce. I like Larry. I met him on many occasions, but I said that this business, ladies and gentlemen, and you'll pardon the expression, is a whore's business. And they may all appear to be nice and great, but the jealousy and the infighting in this business is unbelievable. The insecurity of people in the news business and in radio and television is unbelievable. Because for everyone that is on the air that you see visibly on television and everyone that you hear on radio, there are about 1,000 tapes sitting in every program director's office of resumes and tapes that are sent almost on a daily basis. I remember we had a program director at WWDB. I think they brought him in from Seattle, Washington. I went through so many program directors there, and they had a business out there connected with the radio business, and we found out, or management found out, it wasn't any of my business, management found out that while he was being paid by WWDB to be program director, he was busy running his business in Seattle, Washington. It wasn't a bad gig. He had a year's contract with paid salary, benefits, and all that goodies. And then when they finally fired him, they must have cleaned out. I remember this distinctly. They must have cleaned out at least 2,000 resume tapes that were sent to WWDB that year from people wanting my job, Dominic Quinn's job, Bernie Herman's job, Susan Bray's job, you name it. They had resume tapes. So the insecurity of people behind the microphone in front of that camera is unbelievable, because we all know in the business that these audition tapes are in every program director's office. Once in a while they slip out. Some of the companies believe in promotion from inside. Take a reporter, move them up, finally make them an anchor. Others will take temporary screeners, what they call them, producers, give them all kind of fancy names with no money, and move them into the field of talk radio. Some will get disgruntled lawyers who can't make a living doing law, so they become talk show hosts. And it's a whole another business for another time.
2 more questions.
We have 2 more questions on our chat room, and we invite your calls on the chat room. Yes, Ron?
In your opinion, should Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae be bailed out by the taxpayer?
In my opinion, the answer is no. I'm a libertarian at heart. If we start making it a point where we bail out every financial indiscretion, whether it be government-sponsored or not, there will never be winners and losers in our so-called capitalist society. The greed that prevails in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and the abuse of the law that these 2 organizations implemented, deserve to be spanked, and the victims should be unfortunately forced to pay the bill. Because along with the greed of the mortgage industry and the banking industry, as I said in previous programs, the lack of knowledge in communications skills in capitalism, or how money works in America, cannot be taught when you keep bailing people out. And how much can we bail out? We bailed out Chrysler once to $300 million. Like, there weren't enough cars. If Chrysler would have stopped making automobiles, there weren't enough cars in America, of course, to drive. So we bailed out with government taxpayers' money Chrysler. We bailed out this one. And we built stadiums for these multi-million-dollar sports teams. So there has to be a stop to the bailing out of greed. There has to be a stop to the bailing out of ignorance when it comes to how money works. And take your hit. I've taken many financial hits in my life. 90% of it was my own damn fault. But I couldn't learn if I kept getting bailed out. So my answer to that is no. Given assistance and directions, yes. To try to ease the pain of those who became victims of Fannie Mae and of Freddie Mac, but let them suffer from pain so they won't make the same mistake again.
Irv, have you listened or watched Glenn Beck, and if so, what do you think?
I don't watch or listen to Glenn Beck that much. The television production of the Glenn Beck show is like watching a 3-ring circus. Your eyes have to go like this. It just blows my mind. And I don't listen to his radio program because the radio program is basically the same way. I remember we had a gentleman on the program whose name escapes me, who followed me at 6 o'clock at night when I did the 3 to 6. And he had a whole board in front of him, a computer board, that made all kind of sounds. Beep, boop, beep, all kind of crazy sounds. He drove me crazy as I drove home. I said, man, it's driving me crazy. Why didn't he just talk? And Glenn Beck is the same way. Glenn, in my opinion, introduces some great and interesting programming. Unfortunately, I can't watch the genre of his program. But the difference between, say, a Glenn Beck and a Lou Dobbs, I think that Lou Dobbs, for example, believes in what he's doing and placing himself at risk with his battle against illegal immigration and presenting the opposing point of view, and is willing to listen to the opposing point of view. Glenn doesn't do that. I don't think Glenn is committed to anything that he says. He's a great entertainer. He sometimes gives out great information, sometimes out great misinformation. But I don't think Glenn is sincere in his promotion of his program. The thing that I hold against Glenn Beck, and you can check this out on